Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to continue our reading and discussion of the book, The Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson. R.W. Thompson is giving his last comments and last quotes from this notorious work that we've been covering here, entitled Popular Errors Concerning Politics and Religion. Remember, it was originally written by P. Franco, tongue twister there, P. Franco of Italy, and then translated into the English language by a Roman Catholic Prime Minister of England, Lord Robert Montagu. He says in the first full paragraph on page 456, if you're following along in your own copy of this book, he says, with a few more brief comments upon civil marriage, the secularization of education, and the Jesuits, this extraordinary book is brought to a close by admonishing the faithful, that is, Roman Catholics, not to permit their children to receive, quote, a godless education, unquote, in such public schools as are authorized by the laws of all our states, because all education should be under the supervision of the Roman Catholic Church, and by announcing in serious and solemn the serious and solemn phrase that, quote, Protestantism has filled the world with ruins. That's how that book concludes. Popular Errors Concerning Politics and Religion concludes with the quote, Protestantism has filled the world with ruins. So, we must understand clearly that the papacy's design for this country is to make it Roman Catholic by destroying Protestantism. Now, R.W. Thompson says, what an extent of infatuation must have incited this last remark. There need be said of it only that, in former times, there were powerful governments subject to the dominion of the popes. But all of these have passed away. Not a single one is left. Protestant governments have risen out of the ruins of some, and are now rising out of those of others of them, and all of these nations are happy, prosperous, and progressive, whilst the Pope himself, with a vast multitude of his allies assisting him, is devoting all the power given him by the Church to persuade them, these nations, to retrace their steps and return to the retrogressive period of the Middle Ages. In other words, to give up all their progress and return to the dark days of the Middle Ages, when the Pope was literally the God of the earth and ruled over the kings, and the people were slaves. Now, the author of the work, to which so much space has been appropriated, is one of his conspicuous allies, far from being least distinguished among them. And for that reason, the doctrines he has announced in behalf of the papacy have been set forth at unusual length. This having been done, in order that what he has said may be thoroughly comprehended, it needs only to be further remarked here that, according to what he has laid down as the established religious teachings of the Roman Catholic Church, with an infallible Pope at its head, it is impossible for any man to maintain those teachings and at the same time be loyal to the government of the United States. There's no escape from this. But before further comments upon this point, there are other evidences to show how, since the Pope's infallibility was decreed, the lines of distinction between the popular and papal forms of government have been so distinctly announced that it requires very little sagacity to distinguish them, and even less to realize that they cannot coexist in the same country. A reverend educator attached to St. Joseph's Seminary in Leeds in England has since the Vatican Council of 1870, where the Pope's infallibility was made a dogma of the Church, also entered upon the task of instructing the English-speaking world what are the only relations between civil governments and the Roman Catholic Church which an infallible Pope can approve. His views were first communicated through the columns of the Catholic Progress, a periodical of extensive circulation. But they were deemed to be of so much importance and such an essential part of the permanent literature of the Roman Catholic Church that in 1883 they were published in book form so as to assure more general reading. This book, entitled The Catholic Church and Civil Government, so here's another work setting forth the papacy's view of all civil governments, entitled The Catholic Church and Civil Governments, contains but little over 100 pages, and, being in cheap form, has found its way to the United States, where it is expected, of course, that its teachings will inoculate the minds of all the faithful, that is, all Roman Catholics, and furnish instructors to conduct education in religious schools. What it is expected to accomplish will be seen from the following references to its contents. At the opening of the volume, listen to this now. At the opening of the volume, the reader is apprised beforehand of what he shall expect in the way of doctrinal teaching. It is dedicated to the present Pope, Pope Leo XIII at that time, who, besides being designated as the Vicar of Christ, is addressed as, quote, the Christ on earth, unquote. The Christ on earth. You say the Pope's not Antichrist? You insist that Tom's just got a grudge against the Roman Catholic Church, or something has happened in his life that makes him have so much ill will toward the papacy? This is it. This is it. In this work, he's not even referred to as the Vicar of Christ. He is referred to as the Christ on earth. In an official Roman Catholic publication, reduced to 100 pages and made available to every Roman Catholic in this country, announces Pope Leo XIII as the Christ on earth. And people insist that the Pope is not the Antichrist. People insist that the Catholic Church is truly a Christian church. How can you be more opposed to Christ than to assert yourself as the Christ on earth? Anyway, he continues, not as man with the faculties and frailties of human nature, but as God himself, although the author is not represented as a Jesuit. It may well be inferred that he is one from these blasphemous words, which shock the sense of Christian propriety and ought to excite indignation in every intelligent Christian mind. But remember, this book is written for Roman Catholics, not Protestants. He says he starts out by assuming that the present Pope, quote, is still a king, unquote, and that, quote, he exercises a real authority over his subjects, irrespective of the country to which by birth they belong, unquote. In this he agrees with the Italian author P. Franco and the English statesman Lord Montague that the principle of nationality cannot be permitted to prevail against the Pope in his march to universal dominion, that state lines and even ocean boundaries amount to nothing. Upon this hypothesis, he bases the assumption that the Church, the Roman Catholic Church, quote, is a public society, a kingdom, a divine state, unquote, and possesses, quote, the power of public jurisprudence, unquote. Elsewhere, he calls this, quote, external power to legislate, unquote, that is to pass laws binding the conscience of her subjects, to take means to ensure those laws being put in exercise, to be herself the judge of the sense of her laws, to punish them that trespass against those laws, and to bring them into the right path by coercion, unquote. That's by force. Okay? He endeavors, by various modes of statement, to establish the proposition that the Roman Catholic Church is, quote, independent, unquote, of all civil governments, until he reaches the point of positively asserting it, assigning as the reason that the, quote, Church is the continuation of the authoritative presence of Jesus Christ in the world, unquote. Turning away only for a moment from the idea of a quote-unquote universal Christendom, unlimited by the separate nationality of states, he draws a melancholy picture of the condition of the world unless this independence of the Roman Catholic Church shall be fully recognized. Quote, once grant, he says, that the Church is subordinate to the civil state, and there will ensue a complete upsetting of the scheme of salvation, an entire submersion of the divine truth, a total overthrow, nay, an utter destruction of the kingdom of Christ, unquote. Quoting further, he says, she knows no earthly power can bind her, unquote, nor can she, quote, swear fealty or own allegiance to any other sovereign, unquote, which propositions he proves by the syllabus of error of Pope Pius IX. Hence he reports, quote, the Church is a perfect society, and independent of the state, unquote, and emphasizes it by declaring, quote, that the state is in the Church as the college is in the state, unquote. She has, quote, the right way. She has the right to enter every kingdom in the world, to set up her tents, to propagate her doctrine, to make subjects, to reign in every quarter of the earth, and to use the weapons most suited to accomplish her object, unquote. She, that is the Roman Catholic Church, quote, is bound to use the means most conducive to her spiritual end. Now this is the Jesuit doctrine, the end justifies the means. Okay? The Roman Catholic Church is to be the kingdom of Christ on earth, against which the gates of hell shall not prevail. And whatever means to achieve that end are good, no matter how diabolical they are. It says, she, that is the Roman Catholic Church, quote, is bound to use the means most conducive to her spiritual end, unquote, and, quote, the illuminating spirit, unquote, that guides her, quote, shows her the advantage of sometimes making use of temporal means, unquote. That is, the Roman Catholic Church can use the temporal governments of the world to achieve her ends. And this just describes all the wars of the world. It says, besides fasting, abstinence, excommunication, and interdicts, quote, even more severe measures have occasionally been found to be very salutary, unquote. Like inquisitions and crusades. Okay? That's what's being referred to here. She, that is the Roman Catholic Church, quote, is justified in using extrinsic coercion, that is outside force, whenever it promises to be of help, unquote. According to, quote, the principle of the coercive power, unquote, asserted by Pope Pius IX in the 24th proposition of the syllabus of error of 1864. The Pope can avail himself of every and any power on the earth to bring about the ends desired by the Roman Catholic Church. Now, this is more evidence directly from the language of the popes, indicating that the militaries of the world can be used by the papacy as he sees fit. And that's exactly what's happened in the United States of America, this once Protestant nation, to apply extrinsic coercion, that is, outside force, wherever he pleases in the world. Again, the United States of America does not fight war to sustain its own independence and sovereignty. The United States of America has long since surrendered its independence and sovereignty and has literally become the global battle axe of the papacy. He says primarily these coercive measures are to be employed against, quote, only the members of the church, unquote. Excuse me. Listen, it says primarily these external measures of coercion are to be employed against, quote, only the members of the church, unquote, but are subject to be employed at the discretion of the Pope against all baptized persons. Have you been baptized in water? You don't profess to be Roman Catholic, but you have been baptized? The Pope's just lumped you in with those that upon whom he can impose external force. Okay? You may think you're not Roman Catholic, that the Pope has no jurisdiction over you, but that's not what the Pope thinks. If you've been baptized in water, you belong to him. Now, you may be a rebellious child in desperate need of this external coercion, but it is his divine right, his service to God to punish you and to bring you back into full communion with the Roman Catholic Church. You may call yourself a Protestant, but you're still under the jurisdiction of the papacy. So saith the Vicar of Christ, the Christ on earth. Right? Are you getting the picture? He says primarily these coercive measures are to be employed against, quote, only the members of the church. That is, only the members of the Roman Catholic Church, unquote, but are subject to be employed at the discretion of the Pope against all baptized persons. Quote, once baptized, he says, then the church has over them all the rights of a parent. Okay? You've been baptized in any church, you've been baptized in water, then the papacy becomes your parent, according to the teachings and the laws of the Roman Catholic Church. This includes baptized Protestants who, by the decree of the Council of Trent, are considered as sheep gone astray, but still within the jurisdiction of the Roman Catholic Church. Okay? You may have protested against the Pope, but you still belong to the Pope, just like a rebellious son still belongs to his father. He says the church, he insists, is subordinate to the state in nothing, but the state is, quote, subordinate to and under the guidance of the church in all matters which touch even incidentally upon the moral life of the state, unquote. The state, quote, is bound not to institute any law or sanction any custom which can in any way hinder the Roman Catholic Church in gaining her supernatural end, and is bound to aid the Church by a material assistance whenever the Church deems such assistance necessary, unquote. Material assistance. What is that material assistance? What has it been throughout history? Militaries, men, money, and blood. That's what the material assistance is that is raised up in defense of the papacy. Blood, money, and treasure. Military force. That's the material assistance that has historically been rendered at the papacy's disposal. It's happening right here in the United States of America. How dare we call the United States of America a Protestant nation when literally every one of its resources are used to strengthen the power of the Pope in the world? Where's the protest in that? He goes on further with other quotes. He says, at the present day, there does not remain one truly Catholic state. Now remember, this is at the time, even at the rebellion of Italy. Right there, Rome itself was rebelling against the temporal power of the Pope. It was the last Roman Catholic nation to fall. It says, but this does not release them from the obligation of obedience to the Roman Catholic Church because, quote, the greater portion of their subjects are baptized, unquote, and, quote, baptism enrolls a man among the children of the Church, and hence, in spite of their denying the claims of their true spiritual master, they are, as Christian states, still bound by one obligation, namely, to refrain from establishing any law which is against the conscience of their Catholic subjects, unquote. Therefore, the Church must, quote, be obeyed by her subjects with or without the goodwill of the civil power. With or without the goodwill of the government of the nations, the Roman Catholics must serve the Pope and the Church. This simply means they're outside of the law. No temporal law is binding on a Roman Catholic if it contradicts the teachings of the Church or the desire or wills of the popes. Quoting further, he says, quote, the Church has a right to carry out her divine mission in every land, and to do so, if need be, in spite of the civil power, unquote. Quoting further, he says, the Church sends her ministers throughout the world, independently of the favor or permission of the temporal powers, invest them with absolute power. So there's what your bishops and your priests represent in the world. Absolute power of the Pope. Untouchable by the civil governments of the world. They are the shadow government in every nation of the world. Okay, we've come up on the break. We'll return to the reading of the book Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson. You're listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio.
$100 days, 100 subscribers at $7 will bring FirstAmendmentRadio.com to the minimum level necessary to sustain it through 2015. Go to support.FirstAmendmentRadio.com. $7 a month. Really, you can afford that for our Protestant First Amendment rights and the gospel of the kingdom message. Where your heart is, there will your treasure be also. Go to support.FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Have you seen the Left Behind movies? Have you read the Left Behind fictional book series? Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. Because they see the world stage shaping to fulfill what they have been led to believe is sound biblical interpretation, a left behind rapture scenario. This false view of prophecy is reinforced in the mind, not only of its adherents, but also includes those who have been merely exposed to the specific media. Is it possible that false prophecy can be fulfilled? The rapture theories have always been in dispute, pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib disputes have risen up in exclusively evangelical circles of recent history, so that when true believers don't suddenly disappear, this element will easily go by the wayside when all see a new Jewish temple begin to be built. Will this be part of the great delusion that will come upon the whole earth? It seems that this great prophetic delusion has already overcome practically the entire American evangelical and Christian world. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. To learn more, visit crosstheborder.org. That's CROSS, crosstheborder.org.
Record budget deficits, bankruptcies galore, and the U.S. dollar is at an all-time low. With today's gloomy economic outlook, safe investments are often hard to find. For over a decade, Melody Cedarstrom at Discount Gold and Silver Trading Company has been helping people secure their future by investing in the precious metals. Melody has the honesty, integrity, and experience that is often lacking in the precious metals business. Let her put it to work for you. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 800-375-4188. That's 800-375-4188.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you appreciate Inquisition Update and would like to hear it continue on First Amendment Radio, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. Now we're going to continue with more quotes from this work entitled The Catholic Church and Civil Governments. It was written by a man by the name of Reverend John Earnshaw, a true papist, obviously, but listen. He's not writing off the cuff. He's interpreting Roman Catholic canon law and putting it into plain language that even a stone could understand. Okay? He continues, the quote says, the Church, that is the Roman Catholic Church, has a right to carry out her divine mission in every land, and to do so, if need be, in spite of the civil power. In spite of the government. Another quote, the Church sends her ministers, that is, her priests and her prelates, throughout the world, independently of the favor or permission of the temporal powers, and invests them with absolute power. Where do they get this absolute power? From the Pope, of course. The Christ on earth, remember? Now, when the Pope assigns them a duty, when the Christ on earth assigns them a duty, quote, he gives them a right to carry out that duty in the teeth of every earthly power, unquote. Quoting further, he says, for the civil power to endeavor to hinder the Roman Catholic Church in the exercise of this right is a crime. It is to resist God, unquote. All right? To resist the Pope is to resist God, right? The Christ on earth. He claims for the Roman Catholic Church the right to go into all the countries in the world with or without their consent and, quote, there to establish and unfold herself, to set up her machinery, unquote, in whatsoever way she may deem expedient. Quote, hence, he says, the Church has a right to erect her hierarchy, to set up her tribunals, to hold her synods, to open schools, to found colleges and convents, and especially to be free and unfettered in her communications with the Pope. There's your shadow government. She, the Roman Catholic Church, has a right to spread her faith and, quote, needs not to sue for leave from any earthly power, unquote. And, quoting, it says, this right the Church can never lose. It can never become obsolete. No length of time can prescribe against it, unquote. That is, no government can exist long enough to acquire the right to mature a system of laws which the Pope may not rightfully command to be resisted and set aside when he shall decide that the interests of the Roman Catholic Church require it to be done. Doesn't matter how long a nation or a government has existed in the world. Arbitrarily, at the demand of the Pope, that government and its laws can be set aside and replaced with whatever government the Pope wants to put in place. So the government of the United States, this so-called heretical government, this Protestant government, may at any time by the Pope, with the help of his priests and his hierarchy and his shadow government, with the help of the fifth column of Roman Catholics that live within this country, can set aside the government whenever the Pope decrees it to be done. That's exactly what's happening in the country today. Setting aside the Protestant government of the United States, setting aside the Protestant Reformation, and if you need help doing the math, it simply means setting aside Protestants. And, of course, history bears witness to how Rome sets aside Protestants. Now, before closing, he treats of the separation of church and state and justifies the condemnation of it by Pope Pius IX in the syllabus, and says that, quote, after such a declaration of the supreme pastor, no true Catholic can hold that politics and religion ought to be utterly separate, unquote. But not content with the authority of Pope Pius IX upon this point, he adds that of the present Pope, Pope Leo XIII, whom he represents as having lifted up his voice, quote, to teach the world that while the church and the civil governments are orders distinct in their origin and in their nature, it is the will of heaven that religion lends its aid to the state and that the state should support religion, unquote. That is, the Roman Catholic Church and the state should be united together and each aid the other in maintaining its authority so that by their joint alliance they should be able to render a government of and by the people impossible. There's the overthrow of our country. This is what R.W. Thompson's been telling us. And this is what I see in my careful analysis of what is going on in this country after years of research and reading these books. Church and state are now united, brought about by Vatican Council II, now making the Roman Catholic Church a supreme majority in this country. The Pope can now count all the ecumenical evangelibellies as having submitted to his spiritual and temporal power, and that together they make a mandate. They constitute a mandate, a political mandate. And our government has no choice but to accept their dictation, the Pope's dictation. And they're going to make a government of, by, and for the people impossible. They're going to restore papal monarchy in this country. That's the New World Order, and there's nothing new about it at all. It's as old as Romanism itself. He says, in order to accomplish this and other objects pointed out by him, he represents that the Roman Catholic Church, quote, brooks many affronts and suffers many wrongs, and makes herself all things to all men, unquote, as the Jesuits did when they worshipped the idols in China and became Brahmins in India, so that she may bring all nations and peoples under her dominion, and the Pope become the ruling power of the world, quote, independent of all civil governments, unquote, and, quote, subject to no earthly ruler, unquote. So the Jesuits became all things to all men. In India, they were Brahmins. In China, they worshipped the idols and images of China in order to get control of their governments. And do you know what? They come into our Protestant churches, and they're more Protestant than any of us, but they're making us Roman Catholic. Okay? They have been all things to all men, including Protestants. They can walk into a Protestant church and appear for all intents and purposes to be a Protestant of Protestants, even to the point of condemning their own church and their own popes, but at the same time teaching you popish nonsense like futurism. Okay? And since he looks like a Protestant, we just gobble up that garbage, and without realizing it, have admitted that we aren't Protestants either, because we don't protest the Pope. We no longer see him as the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist, but that the Antichrist is this one individual that's going to sign a peace treaty with the Jews, a 7-year peace treaty with the Jews. You see, just like they were in China, just like they were in India, the Jesuits have done the same thing in the Protestant churches. All things to all men, all for the greater glory of the Pope of Rome. He says, thus we have in plain and authoritative language a complete portrayal of the only form of government which the Pope can approve. If he seems to be reconciled for the time being to any other form, it is merely because it is expedient to do so. So that by being, quote, all things to all men, unquote, in obedience to Jesuit teaching, he may thereby make himself surer of ultimate triumph. Every man who shall take the pains to scan the foregoing evidence will find in it ample proof of the fact, to say nothing about other independent governments, that the papal system is more antagonistical to the civil institutions of the United States than to any other in the world. Whatsoever professions to the contrary may be put forth, it is a palpable truth, absolutely incontestable, that the fundamental principles of our government are the subjects of constant and vindictive assault by the papal party, the followers of the Pope, in and out of the United States. The framers of our government secularized it by measures which resulted in separating church and state. But the Pope and his hierarchy, aided by the Jesuits, fling in our faces the accusation that in doing so, they violated the divine law, which it is their religious duty to restore. We have established a nationality of our own, recognized by all the nations of the earth, but they tell us that that it possesses no authority to impose the least restriction by any laws it can enact upon the power of the Pope or his army of ministers and employees within the borders of our own territory. We have guaranteed freedom of conscience or diversity of religious belief, but they confront us with the charge of heresy on account of it and openly avow their purpose to destroy this guarantee by employing the combined powers of church and state to unify their own religion to the exclusion of all others, by laws above and superior to our Constitution. That is Roman Catholic canon law. Now, we have secured freedom of speech and freedom of the press and have provided for civil marriages and for the secular education of our children at the public expense. And they tell us that on account of these and other equally important measures of public policy, we have become a quote-unquote godless nation, living under a quote-unquote godless law enacted for godless purposes, and that they have been divinely appointed to perform the holy duty of exterminating all these evils in order to save us from the destruction inevitably awaiting us on account of them. One is required to give but a single moment of reflection to be assured that if the papacy, by the aid of his hierarchy and the Jesuits, shall be permitted to achieve the results for which they are now so anxiously seeking, and acquire such dominion as they desire in the United States, our free institution must come to an end. They can win success only by our defeat. Papal government can only prevail here when our present civil institutions shall be destroyed. And they have been destroyed because Protestantism has been destroyed, and Protestantism was destroyed by futurism, Jesuit futurism. And the proof of that destruction came at Vatican Council II. And now Catholics and Protestants alike are endeavoring to raise the papacy to global supremacy and especially supremacy in the United States of America. That's what we get for forgetting our Protestant heritage. This is what we get for forgetting our Protestant history. R.W. Thompson is well trained to assess the greatest threats to our Protestant institutions. And his assessment is there's only one power on this earth capable of overthrowing this government. It is both a domestic and a foreign threat. It is Roman Catholicism. And now aided by those who once called themselves Protestant, it's virtually a done deal. All that's left is the bloodshed. And I predict that could begin at any moment. You know, there's much talk about concentration camps in this country. So many concentration camps that you have to admit they weren't erected to take care of a minority of the population. They were created to sequester a majority of the population. I wonder if the reality of any of this is beginning to soak into my listeners. I don't get much feedback, and it's disconcerting to sit here every morning and read for an hour in the hopes that someone out there will begin to comprehend what's really, 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 really happening in this country. You know, it's hard to compete against well-financed, well-equipped, well-supported, well-heralded programs like Alex Jones. It's hard to compete with that. But I'd rather be telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and go down with one listener. Chapter 25 of the book is entitled Intrigues and Interpretations. He says, one of the most conspicuous manifestations of the spirit now prevailing among the leading nations is that all of them are struggling to go forward and not backward. Italy, in this respect, does not constitute an exception to this general rule, as her present prominent position in Europe abundantly testifies. Hence, every sensible man well knows that the government now existing there cannot be overthrown, so that the temporal power of the Pope can be restored, except by another revolution or by the military invasion of a foreign power. And remember, the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church at that time was preaching to Roman Catholics that they must band together and form a global religio-political power that could invade Italy and physically overthrow the Italian government and reinstall the Pope as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords in Italy. Catholics living in this country, enjoying the liberties of Protestant government, were going to use American manpower and resources to overthrow a legitimate democracy in Italy. He says, which of these remedies it is the purpose of the papacy to invoke can only be conjectured. But since one or the other of them must, from necessity, be in contemplation, it is essentially important that the true relation which the dogma of papal infallibility bears to the temporal power should be well understood in order to see what will be apparent to any careful investigator, the impress of the Jesuits upon the papal policy, and that but for them, the Church would be left to the enjoyment of its religious faith without the disturbance of any of the nations. Now, here R.W. Thompson is crediting the Jesuits for all the problems that the Vatican was suffering at this time. The Jesuits were busy stirring the pot, enforcing the temporal power of the Pope, enforcing the infallibility of the Pope, when the whole world was going the Protestant way. And if the Jesuits, R.W. Thompson is saying that if the Jesuits would have just shut up and sat down and leave the people alone, the Pope would have enjoyed far more power and influence in the world at that time than he did. It was the Jesuits who excited the spirit of rebellion among the Roman Catholic nations of Europe to follow the Protestant example. They were like bull moose in a china shop. But the papacy held fast to its alliance with the Jesuits, despite the temporary suppression of the Jesuit order by Pope Clement XIV. He says the temporal power was always an enemy to the peace of the Roman Catholic Church, rending it into hostile factions, separating the Eastern and the Western Christians, and introducing feuds and strifes and schisms between popes and anti-popes, cardinals and clergy, and those who followed them in their long and angry conflicts. Before this tremendous power was usurped, and papal ambition was incited by the desire to possess it, the Church of Rome embraced within its fold almost the entire Christian world. Now, however, it finds itself representing only a minority of those who profess Christianity. All this, and more than this, has been accomplished by restless and ambitious popes who, defying the example and all the admonitions, not only of Jesus Christ himself, but of all the primitive Christians, entangled the Roman Catholic Church in vicious alliances with potentates and kings in order that they might wear crowns of temporal royalty themselves and give increased strength and vigor to the principles of monarchical government by keeping the multitude in superstition, ignorance, and inferiority. That was the old world order, right? When the world was characterized by superstition, ignorance, and inferiority, two classes: those who couldn't spell their own names, and the rich ruling elite, the priests and prelates of the Roman Catholic Church and the kings over which they ruled. That was the old world order, and that's exactly what they are hoping to restore in the world today. He says, and when in the present enlightened age there is no excuse for not knowing the wars, the bloodshed, the persecutions, and the misery which followed this unholy alliance between church and state, in order to create and preserve the temporal power of these usurping popes, he must have but little regard for the welfare of the human race, who would again inflict any part of the civilized world to these or kindred calamities. The Roman Catholic people of Italy have of their own accord removed them, and those who are now seeking to re-afflict them by alliances with foreign and alien powers make themselves disturbers of the world's peace by seeking to embroil other peoples and nations in dangerous combinations for such a purpose. It is not easy to overestimate the importance and seriousness of the issue involved in the proposition to restore the temporal power of the Pope, whether in its relations to the Roman Catholic or the Protestant populations. Insofar as the former are concerned, it involves the conversion of their religious faith into an illiberality and selfishness of Jesuitism, the sacrifice of the ancient faith of the Church to the principles of a the sacrifice of the ancient faith of the Church to the principles of a society which boasts that it has plucked out of the hearts of its members every vestige of human sympathy and affection, and has spent the whole period of its existence in sowing seed of strife and contention, in so opposing the acknowledged authority of the Church. When I see we've come up on the break and I've run out of wind, we'll continue with the reading of the book tomorrow. Footprints of the Jesuits on First Amendment Radio. We'll be back tomorrow.
Visit crosstheborder.org, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.